Bruce Lee accepted a grip challenge from a woman known for breaking men's hands in training. The test ended without force, without struggle, and without anyone declaring a winner. Bruce Lee released first, calmly, while the trainer stood still, trying to understand why her fingers no longer responded. Los Angeles, California, United States. A private strength training studio behind a closed storefront. August 22, 1969, Friday, 8:11 p.m. The room was already occupied before anyone acknowledged that something was about to happen. It was not crowded in the usual sense. No chairs had been arranged, no clear boundary marked where people should stand, and yet the narrow space felt full. Men and women leaned against the walls or stood near the equipment, careful not to touch anything they did not need to. The air carried the dry smell of metal and chalk, mixed with the faint odor of old rubber grips worn smooth by repetition. There was no official event, no sign on the door, no announcement circulated publicly. Most of those present later said they had been told about the evening indirectly, a passing remark after a training session, a quiet suggestion made over the phone that something interesting might be tested later that night. No one could identify who had organized it. The gathering assembled itself through curiosity rather than planning. The studio was designed for measurement. Grip dynamometers rested on a bench near the wall. Thick-handled bars leaned in a corner, their steel dulled by use. A wooden table stood in the center, scarred from years of arm and hand testing. Everything in the room existed to quantify strength, not to debate it. Numbers mattered here. Endurance mattered. Pain tolerance mattered. Stories circulated quietly as people waited. Someone mentioned fingers that had gone numb for hours after a test. Another recalled men twice their size failing to last more than seconds against the trainer who worked there. These accounts were shared without embellishment, almost clinically, as if exaggeration would weaken their credibility. There were no tickets, no cameras, no intention of documentation. The feeling among those present was not anticipation, but caution. It was the sense that this was not meant to be watched by many people, and that watching might change its outcome. Conversations stayed low. Laughter, when it appeared, stopped quickly. When Bruce Lee arrived, the room did not announce it. He entered without fanfare, wearing simple training clothes, unmarked and unremarkable. He did not carry equipment. He did not scan the room. Bruce Lee acknowledged one or two people with a nod and took a position near the edge of the space, leaving the table unobstructed. That choice mattered. He did not move toward the center. He did not ask what had been arranged. He did not appear eager to participate. He waited, calmly, as if allowing the room to decide whether he was needed at all. Those who recognized him felt the atmosphere shift slightly, not because of celebrity, but because of contrast. This was a space devoted to visible effort and measurable strain. Bruce Lee's presence offered neither. He looked lighter than most of the men there, around 5'7", lean, his hands relaxed at his sides. Nothing about him suggested specialization in grip or brute strength. And yet the whispers changed tone. Bruce Lee's name was spoken once, then not repeated. People adjusted where they stood, unconsciously clearing a line of sight toward the table. Someone reached for chalk, then stopped, unsure whether preparation would be appropriate. The studio, usually loud with instruction and exertion, had grown quiet. Nothing had begun. No challenge had been stated aloud. But the room had already crossed into something else, a space shaped by rumor, restraint, and the shared understanding that whatever was tested next would not fit neatly into the measurements the studio was built to record. She was already known long before she was seen. The woman who ran the tests in that studio did not advertise herself. She did not compete publicly, did not chase records, did not teach classes in the conventional sense. Her reputation traveled instead through hands, through forearms that failed early, through fingers that went numb, through trainees who left shaking their heads without knowing how to explain what had happened. Physically, she was compact and dense, not tall, but solid through the shoulders and forearms, built in a way that suggested long familiarity with resistance rather than display. Those who trained there estimated her weight around 160 pounds. What mattered more was how that weight expressed itself. Her grip was not sudden or explosive, it was progressive, relentless. Once applied, it did not rush toward a finish, it simply stayed. People respected her because she did not dramatize strength. She spoke little during tests. Instructions were short, conditions were clear. There was no encouragement, no provocation. She treated grip the way engineers treat pressure, something to be applied evenly until the structure revealed its limit. Men who outweighed her significantly had failed without spectacle, often surprised not by pain but by how quickly their hands stopped obeying them. The room responded to her presence without instruction. When she stepped closer to the table, people shifted subtly to make space. Conversations tapered off. Someone wiped chalk from the surface even though it was already clean. This was not fear, it was recognition of authority earned through repetition. She placed her hands flat on the table briefly, not as a warm-up, but as a habit. Her fingers were thickened slightly at the joints, skin conditioned rather than scarred. No jewelry, no tape, no visible preparation. Those who knew her understood that she did not believe in warming up for grip tests. The test itself was the warm-up. It was then that her attention moved to Bruce Lee. She did not stare, she assessed. A brief scan of posture, stance, the way his weight rested evenly without tension. Bruce Lee stood apart from the equipment, hands loose, expression neutral. Compared to her, he looked lighter, narrower, almost out of place in a room dedicated to forearm endurance and mechanical strain. Bruce Lee did not introduce himself. He did not explain why he was there or what he was interested in testing. In a space where credentials were usually proven through numbers, his silence was conspicuous. Several people noticed that she did not ask for explanation either. She simply acknowledged him with a small nod, the way one acknowledges an unfamiliar variable rather than a challenger. Whispers moved again, briefly. Someone mentioned Bruce Lee's name near the back. Another nodded without comment. The stories attached to him were different from those attached to her. They did not involve measurements or failure points. They involved timing, control, moments that ended before they could be fully observed. None of those stories belonged naturally in this room. The contrast sharpened. She represented strength that could be demonstrated repeatedly under identical conditions. He represented something less tangible, carried through rumor rather than record. The table between them, scarred, level, built for comparison, suddenly felt inadequate for what it was being asked to host. She looked at Bruce Lee again, this time more directly. There was no challenge in her expression, no skepticism, just curiosity grounded in confidence. She had tested hundreds of hands. Whatever his reputation was, it would have to pass through the same conditions as everyone else. Bruce Lee met her gaze calmly. He did not posture. He did not smile. He did not adjust his stance. He stood as if the outcome, whatever it was, did not require anticipation. That composure unsettled a few of the onlookers more than bravado would have. Two forms of authority now faced each other across the table. One built on numbers, endurance, and visible failure. The other built on restraint, reputation, and silence. And in that narrow space between their hands, the room sensed that the test, meant to be simple, measurable, and private, was about to become something far harder to categorize. The moment it became clear that others were not leaving, the test changed character. What had begun as a routine evening in a specialized training space slowly reoriented itself around attention. People who might normally have passed through, exchanged a few words, and gone home, instead stayed where they were. No one said they were watching. No one needed to. The way bodies angled toward the table made it obvious. The room tightened without anyone moving closer. Breathing became noticeable. The faint scrape of shoes against concrete carried farther than usual. A grip dynamometer was nudged accidentally and then set back in place with care, as if even small sounds might disturb whatever was forming. The equipment, normally the focus of discussion, faded into the background. The table itself became the center, illuminated by overhead lights that suddenly felt harsher. The trainer sensed the shift. Her posture remained unchanged, but her movements slowed slightly, becoming more deliberate. She was accustomed to spectators, but not like this. This was not curiosity about numbers or technique. This was anticipation, though few would have admitted it. Watching had altered the purpose of the test, turning it from measurement into comparison. Bruce Lee noticed it as well. He had not moved since entering, but his attention seemed to widen, taking in the room rather than narrowing onto the table. He did not look at the onlookers directly. He did not acknowledge the increased focus, but his stillness adjusted, settling more completely, as if grounding himself against distraction rather than pressure. The contrast between them sharpened. The trainer represented visible certainty. She had performed this test countless times. Her confidence was procedural, rooted in repetition. The watching crowd reinforced that confidence, consciously or not. They expected the familiar outcome. Hands would fail. Fingers would loosen. The test would end the way it always did. Bruce Lee offered no such cues. He did not roll his shoulders or flex his hands. He did not shake out his fingers or glance at the chalk. His hands remained relaxed, almost indifferent. For those accustomed to reading signs of readiness, this absence was unsettling. It suggested either ignorance or something else entirely. A low murmur passed briefly through the room, then stopped. Someone whispered that this felt different. Another replied that nothing had even started yet. The exchange went nowhere. Words seemed inadequate, and so they were abandoned. Silence took their place. The trainer spoke first. Her voice was calm, direct, stripped of ceremony. She outlined the test conditions again, even though most of the room already knew them. Grip set, no twisting, no sudden release. End when one party could no longer maintain control. Her tone suggested this was routine, but the repetition itself acknowledged the presence of witnesses. Bruce Lee nodded once. He did not ask questions. He did not negotiate terms. He did not frame the test as a challenge. His response was minimal, almost incidental, as if the conditions did not require discussion. That simplicity unsettled some of those watching. It denied them the tension of verbal escalation. As Bruce Lee stepped closer to the table, the room leaned in without moving. People shifted their weight forward slightly, unconsciously. A few folded their arms, not defensively, but as if bracing. The table, scarred from years of use, suddenly felt fragile, not physically, but symbolically. It was about to host something it was not designed to explain. The trainer placed her hand on the table, palm down, fingers relaxed. It was a familiar gesture, one she had made hundreds of times, but now it carried a different weight. Watching had transformed the act into a signal. The test was no longer casual, it was deliberate. Bruce Lee mirrored the movement, placing his hand opposite hers. His fingers rested lightly at first, not yet engaging. His posture remained upright, his breathing even. There was no visible tension in his forearm, no sign of preparation. To several witnesses, it looked as though he were waiting for something other than the signal to begin. The room held its breath, not because of excitement, but because of uncertainty. The presence of witnesses had turned a simple grip test into a moment of exposure. Whatever happened next would be seen, remembered, and debated, precisely because no one had intended it to be. In that quiet, the test crossed a threshold. It was no longer just about strength. It was about what would remain once strength had nothing left to prove. The beginning did not announce itself. There was no count, no verbal cue to start. The trainer simply adjusted her hand slightly, aligning her fingers with practiced precision. Bruce Lee responded by doing nothing at all. No tightening, no visible engagement. For a brief moment, it looked as though the test had not yet begun. Then, the grip closed. The trainer applied pressure gradually, the way she always did, not sudden, not sharp. She believed in removing options rather than forcing conclusions. Her fingers tightened in sequence, distributing pressure evenly across the hand, compressing tendons rather than bones. It was a method refined over years, one designed to endure. Those closest to the table recognized the pattern immediately. This was the phase where most tests ended. Hands usually responded instinctively, fingers stiffening, wrists rotating, shoulders tensing. Pain followed quickly, and with it, release. The trainer's expression did not change as she applied pressure. She was not watching Bruce Lee's face. She was watching the hand. Bruce Lee did not react. His posture remained unchanged. His shoulders stayed relaxed. There was no tightening in his jaw, no visible shift in breathing. To anyone used to interpreting signs of strain, this absence was disorienting. It suggested either extraordinary tolerance or something else entirely. The pressure increased. The trainer's forearm engaged more fully now, muscles becoming defined beneath the skin. Her grip deepened, fingers pressing with deliberate consistency. She did not rush. She allowed time to do its work. This was where endurance usually failed, not because of sudden pain, but because the hand simply stopped responding. Bruce Lee's hand did not stiffen. It did not resist in the expected way. It did not try to overpower her grip or twist free. Instead, something subtler occurred. His fingers seemed to settle rather than strain. The contact remained, but the relationship changed. Several witnesses later said it felt as though the pressure had nowhere to land. The trainer noticed first. Her eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger or confusion, but in attention. The resistance she expected to build against her grip was not there. The hand she was compressing did not behave like other hands. It did not fight back. It did not collapse. It simply remained present. She increased pressure again. This time, the change was visible, not in Bruce Lee, but in her own hand. Her fingers began to tremble slightly, not from fatigue, but from adjustment. She shifted her thumb position minutely, seeking a better angle. It did not arrive. The room was silent now. No one spoke. No one moved. The sound of skin against skin was audible, faint and dry. A drop of sweat ran down her trainer's forearm and disappeared at her wrist. Bruce Lee's breathing remained steady, barely perceptible. Time stretched. What should have been a short test extended into something else entirely. The usual cues, grimacing, shaking, audible strain, never appeared. Instead, the trainer's hand began to lose its certainty. Her fingers, once precise, started to respond a fraction too late. The pressure was still there, but its effect was diminishing. Her expression changed. Not to pain and not to fear, to realization. The control she relied on was no longer resolving into dominance. The grip had not been broken. It had been neutralized, not through force, but through absence of reaction. Bruce Lee remained still. He did not increase pressure. He did not exploit the moment. He allowed the test to continue until it no longer served its purpose. When he finally released his grip, it was calm and deliberate, as if concluding an exercise rather than ending a contest. The trainer did not immediately withdraw her hand. For a brief second, her fingers remained in place, unresponsive. Then she opened them slowly, flexing once, then again. The movement was careful, exploratory.
She looked at her hand as if expecting it to behave differently. No one spoke. The test had ended without declaration. There was no clear winner to announce, no failure to point to. And yet, the outcome was unmistakable. The grip, meant to demonstrate inevitability, had reached its limit without reaching a conclusion. Bruce Lee stepped back slightly from the table. He did not look to the room. He did not acknowledge the result. He simply returned to stillness, as if the moment had passed the instant it was complete. In that silence, the room understood something essential. The iron hand test had not been beaten. It had been rendered unnecessary.
The release did not bring relief to the room. It created a different kind of tension, one without motion. People remained where they were, eyes still fixed on the table, as if waiting for something else to happen that would explain what they had just seen. No one spoke immediately. The silence felt earned, not awkward. The trainer kept her hand raised slightly above the table, not clenched, not withdrawn, just suspended, as if her nervous system had not yet caught up with the decision to stop. When she finally lowered it, the movement was slow and deliberate. She flexed her fingers once, then again, testing sensation rather than strength. They responded, but not as expected. There was no visible pain on her face, no shaking, no outward sign of injury. What appeared instead was confusion, subtle and contained, the kind that follows a result that contradicts long-held certainty. Her grip had not failed from overload. It had failed because it had lost relevance. Those closest to her noticed the change immediately. This was a woman accustomed to endings. In her experience, grip tests concluded clearly. Someone released, someone endured longer, numbers were recorded or not. What had just occurred offered none of that clarity. There was no spike of pain to explain release, no exhaustion to justify it. The confidence she carried did not collapse, it withdrew. She stepped back half a pace from the table, not to disengage from Bruce Lee, but to create space for thought. Her posture remained upright, controlled, professional, but the authority she usually projected through inevitability was absent. In its place was consideration. Bruce Lee said nothing. He did not look at her hand. He did not look at the table. He did not look at the room. He stood calmly, hands relaxed again at his sides, as if the test had never required effort in the first place. His composure offered no explanation, which made the absence of explanation more pronounced. That silence divided the room. Some accepted the outcome immediately. They had seen enough. For them, the trainer's fingers hesitating, failing to reassert control, was decisive. Strength had met something it could not dominate, and the test had ended on that realization alone. Others resisted that conclusion. They replayed the moment aloud in fragments. Someone suggested that Bruce Lee must have conditioned his hands unusually. Another wondered whether the angle had favored him. A third insisted that endurance, not maximum force, had been tested, and that endurance had simply shifted sides. None of these explanations satisfied everyone. The trainer did not join the discussion. She listened briefly, then raised one hand slightly, not to command silence, but to signal closure. When she spoke, it was measured and quiet. She did not defend the test or reinterpret it. She acknowledged only that it was finished. That acknowledgement mattered more than any verdict. Bruce Lee nodded once. Not in agreement, not in triumph, just recognition that the moment had concluded. He did not wait for reaction. He did not stay to clarify. He stepped away from the table, returning to the edge of the room where he had stood when the evening began. No one stopped him. The trainer watched him go, her expression unchanged but attentive. There was no resentment there, no embarrassment, only the recognition that something foundational had shifted, not publicly, not dramatically, but definitively. The arguments continued quietly after he moved away. Some insisted the result proved nothing. Others said it proved too much.
But beneath those disagreements was a shared understanding that the usual hierarchy had not resolved the test. Strength had reached its limit without being overpowered, and that unsettled everyone in the room in different ways. What had broken was not the trainer's reputation. It was the assumption that grip, applied correctly, patiently, and without error, always produced a clear ending. And once that assumption failed, it did not return easily.